and you have to figure out the genes, which is a bit of work. Then you just email basically that information to a company, GATC, very long string. They make that genetic material in a machine. It comes out in a jar, literally. Put that in a sterilized mouse egg cell, create it into a mouse, then clone that, and then send you the mice. And then you can do your research. And that's for $250 per mouse in lots of thousands or something. So a technology that 15 years ago was exceedingly expensive and almost impossible to handle has now been totally sort of, industrialized. Now, cloning babies, we can probably do it. The problem is it's been made illegal all over the world. And what that usually means is not that it doesn't happen, it means that we don't know if it happens. It's a bit like with drugs, which are also illegal, but of course if you go to Amsterdam, you can probably find some. So banning these kinds of technology is usually not the answer. Regulating them will probably be the trick. And a very difficult trick, mind you. I don't have all the answers here. So this is your own personal human genome project. You can spit in a little kit and send your spit to a company. They will do a gene scan on it and then send you a little letter detailing all the genetic diseases you do and don't have. And what that means is then you can sort of, more proactively insure yourself against those things or take other measures. This is going to be quite disruptive to the Dutch healthcare system, which is based on the fact that none of us really know what the future is, so therefore we pool all the money. It's very socially, very nice, very cuddly. When people will know some of their medical future, they might be starting to opt out of that system. So this is going to be quite interesting what that's going to do. Other kinds of technology, this is an artificial arm, which is hooked into the central nervous system of the patient, which means that she can actually move it and operate it by thinking. Now, you can't play piano with that, but you can tie your shoelaces or just eat with a knife and fork, things like that. Of course, the sad thing is that the best way to advance this kind of technology is to have a big wealthy country be involved in a big messy war, because that's when you get unlimited budgets and lots of young healthy test subjects. It's the same with neurosciences. They profited enormously from World War I, specific holes and stuff like that. So this is another solution. We still have a couple of 100 million blind people on the planet, and this is one of the technology tracks to restore them. So this is what Jesus used to do, and now we might be doing it ourselves in the near future. This is an experiment that has just been done. I think it's pretty much a one-off. This is not sort of suitable for serial production, but we do these sort of experiments. So I think, blindness might actually become a curable disease within a decade or so. This is another solution where the person can actually thought control the robot. So this is interesting for patients with, for instance, high damage to their spinal cord, so they can have a little help in the household. This is Mr. Craig Venter. He's an American entrepreneur, geneticist, and he builds life forms from basic chemical components. Again, it's sort of like the Lord himself, did once upon a time. And he did a talk, many places, but one of his famous talks was at TED, which you may have heard about. And somebody in the audience then, after his talk, sort of stood up and says, Mr. Venter, don't you think you're playing God? And he sort of laughed for a bit and said, we're not playing. And he was very serious. He has been sailing around the world in his yacht, sucking up little lumps of water from the sea, and then gene mapping basically the Pacific Ocean. And it turns out that in every little bucket of water there's a whole new ecosystem that we didn't know about. And he wants to sort of do useful stuff with that. So biotechnology, which is sort of, one of the other big things, is we take our brain, we make it into knowledge, we make knowledge with it, that builds new tools, and that could actually maybe allow us to build a better brain. Literally, an organic brain, a brain 2.0, which doesn't have all of the problems that our brains have, and maybe some improvements. We could all think of a few things we'd like. Now, of course, there's a third thing, is that there's always too little stuff. This is what we call scarcity, and there's a bunch of guys and people called economists, and they've made a science of it. Well, they call it a science. Actually, I think over the last year we've seen a fairly dismal failure in that area. I had economics in secondary school, and this is how the teacher explained it to me. He said, economics is the study of human behavior under conditions of scarcity. I always thought that was a brilliant way of explaining it. The one thing that always bugs me, however, is that we then spent several years studying the choice process instead of trying to figure out how we would end the scarcity, which, for a sort of a blossoming nerd like me, clearly was the real problem. The scarcity was just a symptom. So I always thought it was a bit sort of a waste of time. Now, there were a bunch of clever people at NASA and some other places who looked at the internet and said, look, in the digital space, we've solved the scarcity problem, pretty much. Finding stuff, and there are some other issues that we debated earlier today, but the scarcity is no longer the problem here. Now, if we can take the wealth of the digital world and pour it back into the physical world, then we have some really cool stuff. Of course, they were inspired by Star Trek replicators and such. This is nothing new. But this is actually what works. There are variants of this actually at HAR, 3D printers which make physical three-dimensional objects from digital information and very basic materials. This one is very special because it is pretty cheap. I think they got it under $2,000 now, something like that. It actually makes most of its own components. So when you think about that for a little bit, you start to laugh very hard at most economics and most economic theory. Because, of course, it can make lots of other stuff too. For instance, small piece of electronics. Since last year, they actually can also print batteries into devices, which you then have to charge, but then you have an electronic device with rechargeable batteries, which you can actually make at home. And, of course, all the designs are open source, so you can adapt it, improve it, give back to the world, and have lots of fun with it. So that's going to be Industrial Revolution 2.0. This is a comparable device, except this prints living cell tissue. For instance, you take a couple of cells from a patient who needs a heart valve, and you can make a bit of a heart valve from the genetic material of the patients who need it. So this has some pretty cool implications for our, massive lack of organs and things like that. There's a group at Wageningen University in the south of the Netherlands, Agricultural University, who's looking into this technology to see if they can industrially produce steak from cow cells without having to kill new cows all the time to make the steak. So that would be cool. So you can have a vegetarian steak, but it'll taste just the same. Sounds very nice to me. So, since starting out with this fish stacks thing and, bashing in the heads of animals and each other sometimes, we've come quite a long way. And you can go outside here and see some of the results. And, we haven't done bad at all. But nature is still really sort of getting the better of us. This is a very cool thing that nature makes. It's called a potato. Make chips out of it and a few other things. Many of us don't buy them this way, but this is how they come out of the ground, apparently. And it's a really cool thing, because you put it into the ground, and then you don't really have to do a hell of a lot. It's just, just a bit of water, a bit of sunlight, and then it makes copies of itself. And it does this with atomic precision. So the materials in this potato and everything that's in the new potatoes that grow out of this one, solar-powered, made from materials in the ground and in the air, is exactly the same, down to the molecular level. So your entire potato chip factory can be standardized around it. It's really cool. So that is a really cool way of making stuff. Oh, there we go. Imagine that instead of, building a bunch of houses, we could just put a brick in the ground and then just wait a while and, the thing would grow. Because this is actually what trees do. And they've been doing it for quite some time. So it sounds really funny, but this is actually what trees do. You have a little chestnut, it goes into the ground, out comes the tree.